I'm standing in Argyle Street, which is a scene that's used repeatedly throughout the film The Ladykillers. It's actually the view from Mrs. Wilberforce's house, looking into the throat of King's Cross, beyond this St Pancras station. The Ladykillers is very much a King's Cross film. It's set here. A lot of the films are shot on location on these very streets. And what's very significant about it is it gives you a sense of what King's Cross was like in the mid-1950s, captured in Technicolor. It's a wonderful, remarkable record of a place that has changed so dramatically over the last 60 years. This street is seen over and over again in the film. The reason why it's seen so much is it's because it's the view looking away from Mrs. Wilberforce's house, not looking at the house. The house itself was a prop built in Frederica Street, about 1.5 miles north of where I'm standing now. So the Mrs. Wilberforce actually lived in 2 different places in the film. What was vital for the director, Sandy McKendrick, was to give a sense of the authenticity of the locality, King's Cross. During the time of the film was being made in the 1950s, the area was pretty much a rough and tough place, with the huff and puff of the railways constantly droning around the area. It was an area that was desolated a little bit by the Second World War, and a place like this, in a way, had seen better times. So in fact, Mrs. Wilberforce's house is a symbol of a place that is slightly creaky. And in fact, of course, throughout the film, there is a reference to the fact that the house is a little bit lopsided, as is Mrs. Wilberforce herself. It was very important to get a sense of this place. And it was very important throughout the film to use different locations in the locality. We're very fortunate that today we can still see this view. It's a scene that hasn't changed much since the 1950s, whereas most of King's Cross has changed dramatically through the big redevelopment of the area. The one thing that isn't here, of course, is the red telephone box, which is seen repeatedly throughout the film. That was a classic Ealing prop, and that telephone box seemed to move around King's Cross during the making of the film. We're in St Chad's Street, just round the corner from Argyle Street. And the reason why I'm here, another great sequence in the film, is just shot at this place. In the film, Cecil Parker, the Major, has just slipped out of Mrs. Wilberforce's house because he's expecting the trunk full of the £60,000 getaway money. But in fact, the police have delivered the trunk. So he makes a quick exit and bumps into Peter Sellers just here, and then the rest of the gang arrive in the car and they drive off round into Argyle Street. What's wonderful about the Ladykillers is the authentic use of King's Cross street names. I'm on the corner of King's Cross Road and Field Street. Here was where the abandoned car was used in the robbery was found by the police. There's a scene where the policeman is on the phone saying the car involved in the armed robbery in King's Cross is here in Field Street. And Field Street has not changed much, this little pocket. We've got the cobbled streets and beyond the church, which is exactly the same as was seen in the film. The street is still as noisy and as bustly as ever. This has always been a really busy thoroughfare of King's Cross. This is Vernon Rise, just a little bit southeast of King's Cross. This particular place was used several times in the Ladykillers. It was most probably the Major, Alec Guinness's favourite spot because it was where he planned the armed robbery, and also he appears afterwards, after the robbery itself. There's a wonderful sequence here just at the telephone box when the Major is keen to find out what is going on with Mrs. Wilberforce as she comes out the station. Where is the trunk? In fact, Mrs. Wilberforce returns to King's Cross station, but she's forgot her umbrella. In the meantime, the whole of the gang have got themselves stuck in the telephone box, awaiting the moment to find out what is actually going on. What is great about this place is this is King's Cross Road, and forever authentic location, because you've got the cars going by pretty much as it was back in the day. The other thing about it, of course, it's just slightly raised, so you've got a great view down through the little park here and beyond into what is further up towards King's Cross. I'm standing just in front of King's Cross Station looking south. Beyond me are the Pentonville and Gray's Inn roads. This shot was used several times in the Ladykillers, particularly to give you a sense, an establishing shot of King's Cross itself. It's also because the station is used in several sequences and you want to get a sense of the people moving out of the station into the streets. This place was always a very busy place, from the porters moving lots of baggage around into King's Cross and out of King's Cross. Particularly the sequence with Mrs. Wilberforce when she's waiting for the trunk to be loaded onto the taxi and taken away along down this road back to her house. When the Ealing film team came to King's Cross, it was a perfect time to shoot the Ladykillers, because the cross still had its industrial heritage, the legacy that made the cross so unique. It had the canal, the gasworks with the big gas holders, and still that very Dickensian backwater, which King's Cross perfectly suited, particularly an armed robbery. The armed robbery sequence was shot just close to where I'm standing now. It was just north of King's Cross Station in the grimy backwater, which hadn't changed since Victorian times. There were the gas holders, the big walls beyond which no one could go. There was blocks of flats that hadn't changed since the 1860s. There was the old German gymnasium, which had been closed down and used by the railways. There was the steam in the background. It was a very picturesque, perfect place to shoot a robbery. With the redevelopment of King's Cross, most of the signposts that were shot in the movie, the places that we know so well, captured in Technicolor from the 50s, have now gone. There's one sequence that is iconic, of course, and that's the armed robbery. And when the gang emerge after they've got the money and they head down out of Cheney Road, which is just beyond me, down in towards King's Cross, past the Great Northern Hotel and into Euston Road. Where the armed robbery took place has pretty much been demolished. There's nothing left of that Victorian grime. The gas holders, the big brick walls, the old philanthropic blocks of flats that housed people for many, many years. That kind of railway atmosphere has gone. In its place is glass and steel, a new King's Cross. But as you go beyond and you head towards the Great Northern Hotel, you just get a sense, that moment, and you think, that is the Ladykillers. The Ladykillers was shot here. If you're wondering where Mrs. Wilberforce's house actually was, it was just here above the Copenhagen Tunnel. The point of view from the house was Argyle Street, but the house itself was constructed on Frederica Street, now long demolished. A Victorian set of houses just placed above Copenhagen Tunnel all the way to the Caledonian Road. This scene was used a lot of times in the Ladykillers, particularly towards the end, the death of the gang, as each member of the gang ends up dead and is dropped over the edge and taken away in a passing train. So the sort of ghoulish end of this dark comedy is just here by Mrs. Wilberforce's house on the Copenhagen Tunnel.